Washington has always been known as a state of makers, trailblazers, innovators, entrepreneurs. We're a birthplace of aviation, cutting-edge agriculture, biotech, software production, renewable energy, and so much more. The work we do in Washington reflects our shared drive to push the limits, explore new ideas, make new things. It forges our future. Now, as we face unprecedented challenges brought about by a pandemic, Washington workers and employers will need to rebuild our economy. But we're up to the task. Our history of making has prepared us to find new ways to grow, to build back stronger. The Awb Institute looks forward to shaping this renewal with Washington in the making, a vision for our state that builds on our strengths: creativity, persistence, courage. Together, public and private partners will remake a Washington that works better for everyone. 5 pillars will guide us: a prepared workforce, a business-friendly climate, technology that lays a foundation for success, continued support for entrepreneurship, and of course, preservation of this beautiful state we call home. We'll identify innovative approaches and collaborations that could support employers in new ways and drive job creation and infrastructure improvements. And we'll keep close watch on the key economic indicators of progress at both the state and county level to support local decision-making and measure our collective efforts. There's a new Washington in the making. Let's rebuild it together for a better economy, for lasting prosperity in every community in our state. To subscribe for updates and join the effort, go to washingtoninthemaking.org today.
Good morning, Tri-Cities. It's 9 o'clock on Friday, so it's time for Coffee with Karl. Today, we're excited to welcome our guest who you just heard his band or his former band, Highway 12, Mike Schwenk. Mike, welcome this morning to Coffee with Karl.
Hey, good morning, Karl. How are you?
Great. That was a great way to start the morning off. It was hard for me to stay in my seat, and I want to get up and start dancing.
That's good.
Was that you on the guitar?
It was.
That's awesome. Great.
Thanks.
Great. I'm not a guitarist myself, but I very much in admiration. Good job. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks. I'm still working at it.
Well, Mike, you currently serve as the chairman of the Awb Institute, but you've served many roles here in the Tri-Cities, and so I'm looking forward to a good conversation today on our current topic of resiliency for the Tri-Cities through COVID. Looking forward to a great conversation. On Coffee with Karl, we always start off with talking about coffee or mugs or whatever. So I've got a special one here today. I've been kind of saving it up, but this I got from my daughter. This is actually Jabba the mug from Jabba the Hutt. And it's not really easy to drink out of, but I did want to highlight that because my daughter saw it at a store someplace and said, I'm going to get that for my dad for Coffee with Karl. He's out of mugs, which I've been running out of, but we've been getting a lot more mugs, and I'll be kind of highlighting those as we go along. So that's my mug for this morning. What do you got, Mike?
Well, since you showed one from your daughter, I was going to show you my boring one, but since you started this, here's one from my daughter. And I don't know but anyway, it's World's Greatest Dad.
All right.
Now, I'm not drinking coffee out of this. And the reason is, you probably can't tell very well, but it's obviously the globe, and then this white stripe used to be all flags from various countries. As a matter of fact, you can barely see the star field from the American flag, the United States flag. But I all of that sort of washed off eventually. It might be in my system somewhere. I really don't know where all the colors and the ink disappear, but I decided I'd retire it to the bookcase.
That's awesome. And as we all know, the status of World's Greatest Dad never goes away, unlike the mugs that we get to symbolize.
I hope not, and I almost believe it's true.
Well, that's great. Well, Mike, we were talking about it on the, get ready for the show, but you and I haven't ever met. So why don't we just start this off at really, base level, and can you give me just a little bit about your history and your career and different roles that you've played in the Tri-Cities over the years?
Yeah, well, we won't go too much. It's complicated, but yeah, my wife and I moved here in '79, and she's from northern Idaho, from Lewiston, Idaho. So that really the reason we're here is to be close to her family. And I have a nuclear background, and I'm an engineer. So, Lewiston, and I said, what's someplace nearby I could get a job? And it was Hanford. So that's what brought us here in '79. Okay. Eventually, I just had enough of that out there and started my own business here in town, and that sort of morphed into TRIDEC. And then ever since I was at TRIDEC, which was 86 to 89, I guess, late 80s, 86 to 90, somewhere in there. And then I just started doing a lot of different jobs throughout the community, different contractors and whatnot, but all economic development related. So, my era at TRIDEC just sort of launched a career I never even knew existed, frankly. And I've been in and out of sort of more the technology-based economic development side of things through various roles throughout the community. And I ended up finally at Battelle at the lab for the last 15 years before I retired, which was now 7 years ago. But I'm still at it, I've been working with AWB ever since I retired, and still trying.
Oh, that's great.
Still trying to make a difference wherever you can.
You bet. Well, it's, we're proud members of AWB, and AWB does some amazing things for both the Tri-Cities and for the whole state, for sure. And that's very interesting, because I just came down the river to take this job starting in February myself from Lewiston. We were there about,
yes, I know.
18 months, but I was born there a long time ago, and then we moved away like when I was 1. So yeah. But we're our own family is also really excited to be here in the Tri-Cities, and again, still have family kind of in southern part of Spokane County, and it's just great because I also have a younger sister in Portland, so Tri-Cities is right here in the middle, and just such a great community. And I think for me, and that'll be the stuff we'll talk about today, but just even during COVID, this is such a good place to be, because as we all know, and as I'm learning through talks like this, we've got a great history of resiliency going through those tough times that the Tri-Cities has seen before. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. You talked about in the late 80s coming to TRIDEC. What was your role at TRIDEC? And then that late 80s period was when we were going through some reductions at Hanford on the production side, right? You want to kind of just give me a little, what was that like, and what are some of those roles that you played in that time period?
Yeah, TRIDEC had, as you know, it had been called TRIDEC, Tri-City Nuclear Industrial Council. And it had just merged with the Chamber of Commerce, Tri-Cities Chamber, and that was through that merger, although some would argue it was an acquisition. Some would say TRIDEC acquired the chamber, but anyway, the name TRIDEC came out of that, so that was at its beginning. And part of all of that was an agreement that, in addition to the heavy influence that TRIDEC had on Hanford, there would be an economic diversification program as well. And so after the merger, the board did a search for an economic development person, and I got the job. And little did I know, within months of starting, the community came unglued. And so it was a very interesting time, tough time. I think I heard you say the other day, you're going to have to correct me on some numbers, but I remember back then that the numbers in our community were like 25% of the jobs were Hanford jobs. So a quarter of the employment was Hanford, but 40% or more of the income was Hanford related. And because of that huge proportion of income, that 40% of all the income in the community, it was easily assessed that for every Hanford job, there was one in at least one more created in town. And so 50% of the employment was Hanford related. And when the supply system was closing down its construction programs, and then the basalt waste isolation project ended, and end reactor, and all the dominoes started to fall. We were having meetings saying, can we hold the losses to 10,000 employees, 10,000 people? It was really, really bad. But I think today now, those numbers, and I'm one of these guys that says economic development progress can only be measured in decades. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but fine. Now I think you're down to like 12% of the local employment or thereabouts is Hanford related, I guess. And I don't know, we're probably at 20% of the payroll or something. You can correct those numbers. But in my mind, it's taken 35 years, to cut that dependency in half, that's how long it takes. But you've done it, we've done it, the community's done it. And so that was the journey that we started. And, how do you do it? And it was, it was pretty amazing. I mean, we built the largest economic development program in the Pacific Northwest through a lot of tricks. And one of those, which actually Sam and I were collaborated on, Sam Boltentest, and
yes, sir.
Was creating a loaned executive program and allowing Hanford contractors to provide us staff that they could pay for out of their overhead. And we did that through legislation to make that legal. But, from that, we got 15 people or whatever and started, we had an army of people.
Wow.
But it was, in my mind, a small army. So I think a big part of what we did back then was I use those terms, we need an army, and I'm going to replay that tape when we get to the AWB Institute, was we put several hundred people in the community through a visioning and leadership program. And the idea was to get everybody involved in this. I mean, Sam wasn't going to do it, and 15 loaned executives on staff wasn't going to do it. But we needed hundreds and hundreds of people in the community doing anything and everything they could to put fingers in the dike and prop us up and get us going again. So anyway, that got me at TRIDEC and got me through all that and taught me about economic development, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and stayed with it ever since. But I burned out after about 4 years of that.
You bet. Well, I can't even imagine the stress that you were going through and the whole community was going through with all of those announcements, almost like a domino effect of bad news for the Tri-Cities, right?
You're probably used to being asked, well, how many jobs have you created lately? And, I wanted them all to ask me, how few did you lose?
No, that's a great way to put it. And I think, I know, we had Karl Adrian on a few weeks ago, and we've had the conversation before. And Karl, I think is right in line with what you're talking about, Mike, that we measure economic development in decades, saying that economic development is really a process, right? And that it's really about doing the right things for the community on attraction, on business retention and expansion, on all the things that we do in economic development. And over some period of time, you're going to have results, but it's not this short-term, you do this and then this thing happens within this time frame. There's a lot of variables for sure. And I think COVID now and what went on in the Tri-Cities in the 80s would be a great example of there's things that are outside of our control. So what we can do is focus on the things that we know work and keep on doing them effectively and innovatively and coming up with good ideas and try to put them to use for the community. I appreciate that shared executive program. Is that What kind of things were the shared executives doing? Like, how did you, kind of organize them into doing functions for economic development?
Yeah, well, as you might imagine, we did create a vision for the community and broke that up into sections, if you will, agriculture, infrastructure, some of the very traditional kinds of things. And then we got a mindset of what I would call, well, not what I would call, but what people might call game changers, or I call them mega projects. But what could we do that just really, really is so incredibly different and big and hopefully impactful? I don't know if that's a word or not, but
sure,
would make an impact. So for example, one loan executive was tasked with, and I'm serious about this, I said, your job is to go figure out how to complete the second half of the Columbia Basin project.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there you go. We had another loan executive, and I said, you're going to go help create what we call the Tri-City Science and Technology Park. And today it's, what is it, Tri-Cities Research District, or that kind of thing. We hired another loan executive. Interesting, this person was actually an architect from the engineering architecture contractor. But anyway, we said, look, our goal is any new dollar that comes into this community turns around in this community and generates wealth and economic development. So we'll take any new dollar from any source. And I said, one of those sources is going to be retirees. So we created what was called the Sun Country Retirement Bureau, and that loan executive began plotting out and working with communities on how could we build a senior citizen, active senior living, place where they could come and enjoy their retirement, and of course the health care and everything, the whole system that would be required for that. Another one was, we had an image problem, clearly, nuclear glow in the dark, it was pretty bad. Whenever I went to the west side of the state, it was amazing what people said to me about our community. And so I said, well, we need a different image. And it seems to me that a lot of youth sports teams come to our community because we have good weather. And so they have their softball tournaments or their track meets, they actually like coming here because they might not get rained on, or whatever. And so we created a sports council, a Tri-City Sports Council. It might still be in existence today, I don't know, but Don Hart has started leading all that. But to create ball fields and infrastructure and all the things that would make us the go-to place for families all over the state to come and for sporting events and enjoy their time here with restaurants, etc. And change the image as, hey, we were just in the Tri-Cities for this tournament, we had a great time. And same thing with the wine industry is how can you get people to come here and think different about who we are, and then take that memory back home and stop talking about us glowing in the dark. And so those were they were very large, but pretty specific projects. The scope was, you go work on this kind of thing.
That's great, because number one, it's great for me to understand this and the work that was done back then, because I think those are really great ideas about, what could we do working together in the future. But, my experience, I hadn't really been to the Tri-Cities before. Like, I'd traveled through, as a lot of people do, and stopped and got gas. And when I came down for the first interview, I even told the story that, Tri-Cities was the last place I got 99-cent gas in the late 90s or something. I was in Spokane and had taken a job down at Woodland and Clem in Western Washington, and drove through pretty often. But I never got off the highway. I never came into town. But, for me and for my family now moving here and being in this role, it's amazing to see the amenities that we really have in this community. We've talked about that before, about placemaking and our tie-in with other organizations like Visit Tri-Cities and the Regional Chamber, and, how we can work together to really make this an even better place to live. But it's great to hear this history, Mike, that, back then with that program, you started down these paths that now we've got great results from. I mean, all the things that you listed off that started back then in the late 80s are things that are really, pillars of our community today. And it's great to hear some of the, how did we get there? And even understand the process that you went through and really tough times to identify, hey, let's look into these things and how do we, get that going. And now you look at it, 30 some years later and see the results. It's great. And a great story to talk about process, the resiliency, and the community coming together to really do these projects.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of psychology in all this, as you well know. Maybe some people think there's some magic wand you wave or some formula you pull out, but to me, this whole thing ended up being a psychological exercise of creating, hope, and let's not wring our hands and say, woe is me. Let's all put our oars in the water, but let's all row the same way. I think the vision that we put together, and by the way, in anticipation of this, I pulled it out last night. I'm probably the only person in town that still has the doggone thing, but the one we wrote in 1988, actually it's sitting in a time capsule in Olympia right now. But, I started reading it, and it is amazing and why you do measure things in decades. And an example is in this vision, we created Washington State University's branch campus system. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, going back to the early 80s, there were conversations in this town about higher education. And we had a joint center for graduate study. We had a GE School of Nuclear Engineering. All of this had sort of morphed. And eventually we had the Tri-City University Center, which is comprised of a composite of higher education institutions. But the conversation was, we need something that's ours, and something with a big reputation. And it was a very interesting debate that went on, because it was sort of two things. Do we create our own, or do we go get a piece of some big research university that would sort of be our own? And where that debate finally came down, and I was the co-chair of that committee, was we were going to go get a branch campus of a research university. And it was either going to be the U or WSU. And the rest were going to be sort of uninvited to leave town.
Sure.
The irony of that conversation was there were no branch campuses in the state of Washington. They didn't exist. But we went ahead anyway. And we went through the debate and the pros and cons. And I remember the day I had to make the presentation to the committee, and I said it needs to be WSU, and here's the reasons why, and no one disagreed. But then the question quickly became, well, how are we ever going to do that? And my point there is, when your back is against the wall, and our community's back was against the wall, so there's this sense of urgency. Really, if you let people start asking how am I going to do it? How are we ever going to do this? We can't do that. There are no branch campuses. How are you going to get? I mean, if you get into that kind of mindset in your conversation, you're toast. Nobody knew how to go to the moon. In 10 years, nobody knew how to do. I mean, the point is, these big things, you don't know how to do them. So if that's why I say it's psychology. I mean, you have to believe in yourselves. We're smart people. We'll figure it out, and we did. Yeah. And in this vision, just to close out this historical thing, was that we would have a branch campus of Washington State University, which we do. Funny, by the year 2000, we thought it would have 3,000 people. God, here it is, 2020, and we're at half that, I guess, right? But it said it would be a center for enology and viticulture. Yeah. Before it even existed, we put that in the vision statement, Wow. And now look what we have there, the Center for Enology and Viticulture. I mean, it's so much fun to go back and look at this stuff, and you're absolutely right. Decades later, you stick with it. It's all about perseverance, belief, faith, belief without evidence. Yeah, we can do this, Yeah. No, we don't have the second half of the Columbia Basin project finished,
Well, that's great. I did want to let our guests know that are watching us that if they have any questions for Mike, you can use the question and answer feature at the bottom. We'll do our best to get your questions. If you're watching on Facebook, you can put your questions in the comment section, and we'll try to get to those too. Again, like my journey down the river for for me here and going through the process. When I came for my first interview, Karl Adrian actually told me about this book, Community Godfather, and so I got the Kindle version and I read it, and it it just helped me understand some of that historical perspective. And Mike, obviously you were highlighted in the book, but obviously Sam Volpentest, and we've talked about him before, was this guy that really did a lot of things in their community. Obviously started TRIDEC and that. And can you talk a little bit about, and I'm not looking for any dirt or anything, but just talk generally about Sam and your relationship with them. And I'm sure it was tough, right? I mean, you kind of had this guy that knew what he was going to do, and he had his way of doing it. And this whole new thing comes about, we're broadening the scope of TRIDEC into TRIDEC and economic development and all those things. And you just give us maybe, some anecdotes or story about Sam. I just appreciate it so much. I love history, and it helps me learn and understand. But how was Sam, and anything you'd like to share with us?
Sure. First, a quick aside. Mark Smith might be on. Watching this.
He is.
Call.
He's already commented.
Yeah, I'm sure he has. But Mark interviewed me for that book, and as he did so many others. And I told him, Mark, to me, the toughest book in the world to write is what you're writing. And he said, actually, the hardest thing to write is a book on fiction. And I said, well, anyway, I think it's hard what you're doing.
Yeah.
But anyway, he would come in and interview me, and he'd have notes from other people. He'd ask questions or whatever. And I'd sit there and I'd look at him and I go, gee, Mark, that's not how I remember it. And I said, but that's for you to sort all this out, So history gets easily sort of rewritten, I think, because memories are so fallible. It's really amazing. But since you asked, it was hard. Sam wanted nothing to do with this. Sam didn't want the merger or acquisition with the chamber. He had his way, they had their way, and in those days it worked. There's sort of the good old boys club that, the 800-pound gorillas in a community that, sat around, and they did. They were puppets. They could pull strings and make stuff happen. They threw their money at politicians. It worked. That was the way it was. And not here, all over, and Sam was a product of all that, and a very, very successful one. So this was, to bring in a chamber and lots of members that, we're going to start mucking around and telling him what to do, and a big board of directors. I mean, and then they were going to hire another guy, or gal, but a guy in those days, really. And it was just beyond him. And so he was so, I think, resentful. I don't know if resentful is the right word, but he was unsupportive of that. So nonetheless, the leadership, sort of prevailed on that. And I think when I came in, I was, 33, and I didn't know anything. And I think Sam quickly saw that, I was kind of a nobody, and not a threat to him or what he did or his network or any of that, and he came into my office early on, and my office, by the way, they wouldn't even make one. I think Jane probably remembers this more than I do, but they put me in a closet. They had Jane clean out a closet. I mean, that was sort of setting the tone, you're going to work out of a closet. And he just said, he goes, we're going to do just fine under the following condition. I'm going to do my thing, and you're going to leave me alone, and I'm going to let you do your thing. And as long as you stay here and your closet, and I'll stay in my office, everything will be just fine. So don't go poking your nose in my business. And so it was sort of like, let's have this line, drawn through the building, and you just keep your space in mind. All of that evaporated over time. Actually, Sam and I became very good friends all the way through to his passing, and he became close with my wife, and it was great, but it was interesting at the beginning, and that's just the way he was, and to him to have to give a report to the board of directors was, I'm not doing that, it was a hard transition for him.
You bet.
But then, like I told you earlier, for the day I went in his office and said, not just me, but a couple of board people said, Sam, we need your help. on my side of this, wall here, for this loan executive program. Then it was like, ha ha ha, oh, you do need me, and all that. And he did. He got the legislation. He got it done. And it was terrific. So.
That's great. I appreciate you opening up. And like I said, it just helps me, understand where we've been. And I think that there's always things that we can all learn from history that, has relevance today. And on this topic of resiliency, I think that it's really great. This is the first time that I've really understood it in those terms, that there actually was this visioning process. There was dedicated work doing in these areas. And, we literally are seeing the fruits of the labor that was started, 30 some years ago. And now we're reaping those rewards, and it's the perfect economic development analogy for sure.
Well, it's important that that vision never died. We created something called the Renaissance Program, and to rebirth of the community. We kept that vision alive through Renaissance 1 and Renaissance 2, having the community work on it. Ultimately, it kind of went by the wayside for a while, but then we created something called the Community Roundtable, and really its job was to keep that vision alive and sort of redo it every 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and try and keep that picture of the community you want in front of you, and never forget it, because then psychologically that's what you work toward. I want that picture, that's the community I want, and you never give up. And so I think the ultimate successor to that is My Tri 2030 right now.
Yeah.
That's just gone through a massive, it's been 5 years, 6 years, I don't know, of building a new vision for the community, and laying that all out, and getting all excited about it again. That's what you have to do. That you just have to do that, and we always have in this town. So.
Yeah. Do you think, and obviously, me being new, we are super excited about My Tri 2030, and the regional chamber led that effort, and just a real model for collaboration, everybody getting involved. And I think it's really set the right tone for so many of those subject areas and committees that they've stood up. But I'm just thinking of, do you think it's a different process, or do you think it's harder to sort of like get people's attention when things are going along really well, like they are now? And again, I don't really know much about My Tri other than what I've learned since I've been here. But then, versus when you started the Renaissance program in the 80s, and there was, I would assume, like a much heightened, awareness of like, hey, we got to do something, let's go. Yeah. Versus, well, things are pretty good, why do we need to do that? You want to talk about that process and kind of how that's a little bit different, but at the same time, it's still a critical process for any community to go through, right?
Never let a good crisis go wasted, right? I mean, it's a psychological thing, and that's why economic development people should take classes in psychology, community psychology, because it is. I mean, when things are going well, fine, everything's fine. Why should I go spend time working on this? I can't even get excited about it. And so it's hard. That's issue number one is, well, go create a crisis. Well, I think we kind of have one now, unfortunately. Right. I mean, It's a tragedy. I mean, geez, we have people ill and passing away. We didn't have that, Yeah. But the other problem is things take too doggone long, and people won't stay with that. You're better off, I think, creating task forces these days, and versus a committee. And everybody has different definitions of those two things, but just for me, a task force has do this task and you're done. Go home. We won't call you again. And it's 6 months, 9 months, whatever, 18 months, but that's it. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. They know what they have to accomplish. When they get there, they check the box. We did it. We're done. Committees, it's like, I don't know, they exist to meet, and so they just, well, what do you want? Let's bring in a speaker to talk to us. Let's, and it just, nobody wants to do that kind of stuff anymore. And so you have to figure out, how to create a sense of urgency around something, and then break it up into bite-sized pieces where people will, I will roll up my sleeves and give you my time for a finite period that I can see on a calendar,
Sure.
and participate and engage and give you everything I can give you, and then end it. So things have really, again, it's psychology of the times.
Oh, that's a great point. Is there, so maybe shifting gears a little bit and talking about your role with the AWB Institute and this new initiative, Washington in the Making. Is that another example, Mike, of this visioning process and kind of similar to what you've done in the past in MyTech 2030 and now, doing it at state level? Is that?
Carl, everything we just talked about, that's what this is, only on steroids. And the backdrop of this was I was chair of AWB a few years ago for a couple of terms, and we were sort of re-engineering the organization, if you will, and we brought in Chris Johnson, who had spent time here, and Chris, to be the new president and all that, and he's the Energizer Bunny, and so we did, and one of the things that we had was a 501c3, a charitable nonprofit, which we call the AWB Institute, and it had been around for about a decade at that time, and mostly workforce development oriented. It had a contract with the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, the technical college system, to connect employers and the community college system. And my view was it's undershooting its potential, that we ought to revisit what that institute is and what it could be, and what it should be for the state of Washington, and particularly the business community, but the employer and employee community of the state. So Chris and I went around the country to visit 6 of his counterparts, state chambers of commerce, and see what they were doing. They all had foundations or these C3 things, like the Institute, and what had they done with them? And so we visited those, and we came back with what I would call, and a term we all know, best practices. And we employed something we called R&D, rip off and duplicate, not to offend my friends at P&L, but that's what it was. We took their best practices, we brought it back, and then everything you and I just talked about for the last 35 years of my experience, I couldn't help it. It was part of my DNA. So what we concluded was, hey, look, this state doesn't have a vision of its future. Doesn't exist. Has it had one in the past? Yeah. Every time there's been a governor, except the current one, there's been a pretty big sort of strategic planning commission or some different names. Never survived the turnover of a governor. So the plans are all gone. And so we said, well, AWB has been around 110 years. We're probably going to be around for another 110. That's a good time frame. So why don't we do one? And we'll own it, and we'll be the steward of it. And we're going to do it. And we're going to do it on behalf of the employer and employee community of the state. And so that was talk about a big, bold vision at the time. We rebuilt the board of directors, and it was, they're like, you got to be kidding me. Who are we to do all of this? And what sanctions us? And, why would anybody listen? And I had and have, for those who are asking that question, an answer. It's going to sound a little weird. It's not our plan. I mean, the first thing we did was we looked at all the plans that had already been written all around the state. And we actually used a software program out at P&L, one of those, information visualization, big data things, that did a web crawling exercise for us and actually pulled 5,000 plans from all around the state, from public utility districts to cities to economic development councils. If someone had a planning document, this machine read it. And what we wanted the machine to do was, well, now tell us what all that says, that was kind of a stupid question. But what it did do, and this relates to Washington in the Making and our conversation, is it summarized, if you will, or clustered all the key, where are all these documents really operating and thinking, and what are they all talking about? And they clustered those, and that's how we came to the 5 pillars that are in Washington in the Making. And My Try 2030 has 6. You know, I should know what your strategic plan is. I helped facilitate that a year ago, 2 years ago. But I don't remember, but it
We have
doesn't
3.
matter. I don't care whether you have 3, 5, 6,
Yeah.
you know, and they're all called kind of something different, names sort of changed.
Sure.
But anyway, you know, I can map the 6 I have, map the 6 from My Try 2030 to the 5 that we have. That isn't really important, but we are all working in the same areas all around. And so that's how we came up with the pillars. It was based on everyone else's plan. So it's not our plan. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, the board said, okay, well, we have to be able to measure success. I mean, we got to know whether anything we do is going to make a difference. So we went to Eastern Washington University, and you know Patrick Jones, I think, up there. And Patrick has done the trends thing. He has 10 or 12 indicators that he does for 10 counties. I don't remember that. Anyway, he's got it. So we went to them, we said, okay, we want to give all 39 counties of this state a set of indicators, or what we now call vitals. And so there are now 34 vitals for all 39 counties. And you can compare your county to any other county, to the state or to national. It's all in there. The data is explained, the sources explain. So now you really have a way to understand what's happening at the county level in my county. So the board said, okay, great. And we stood all that up, and it's on the website in Washington in the making. So it's all there, it's free, use it. So it's a gift to everybody. The next thing we did was we said, we're not going to do the work either. And so, like I said, 35 years ago, we need an army. I said, we need an army. So the army today, so far, is what we call the Grassroots Alliance, and it's over 90 chambers of commerce. I think there's 93 chambers of commerce now, part of the AWB Grassroots Alliance, that are in every nook and cranny of the state. So we have a game plan that's based on everyone else's plan. We have a set of indicators at every county in the state that we can measure progress or not. And we have an army of people we can connect with, which is through every chamber of commerce. And we'd like to broaden that, by the way, to the Washington, what's it called, WEDA, Washington Economic Development Association.
Yeah, WEDA. Yep.
We want to keep bringing in more on that, and something I can talk about later. But and so we have this whole array of people. And then, where does the rubber meet the road? So that, from a project's point of view, and this is on the website, what we're trying to do, we're going to do a couple of things. One, we're going to try and take on projects of statewide significance that all those counties or chambers or Grassroots Alliance members can use. An example, we said, and we're trying to think different about things and take on big projects. We said, why are we having so much trouble with workforce issues? Why can't we find qualified workforces? So one response to that was, why don't we make the workplace an extension of the classroom? How would we do that? So we have ripped off and duplicated from Indiana an intern and apprenticeship portal where you can go and sign up and connect students with internships and apprenticeship jobs at a place of business. And we're piloting that in Spokane, and we're about to start it here in the Tri-Cities, which relates to the My Try 2030, I forget what yours is called, education.
Education, yeah.
Education. Ours is called workforce, but same thing, right?
Right.
And we're teaming up with WSU and the Chamber, obviously, and CBC, and that portal will be up and running here too. And so, and we'll have that spread around the whole state and all of that interconnected. We're on the broadband thing because the big issue for us is rural development. And so getting broadband to every single place, every residence, every place of business, every social agency. I mean, we're tired of talking about it. So let's get it done. So we have a project on that. Given COVID and what's been going on, we've also started a project, and we're stealing and rip off and duplicate from Utah, a remote worker training certification program. We're going to pilot this in Wenatchee with WSU and with the Wenatchee economic development and chamber network. And this is to take advantage of the sort of the new normal these days, which is you can live anywhere and work anywhere. And coming along behind that is going to be what I'm calling, I don't like this word, I don't have a good one for it, but it's called intrastate migration. But how is it that we can facilitate the movement of people who don't want to live in a big city or an urban area to live wherever they want to live in our state and still be able to work from that place and keep their job? And we're going to use our employer base to help facilitate that. It's like Expedia is on the board of directors of the Institute, and we're just going to ask Expedia, what would it take to have, 5% of your workforce spread around the state, living wherever they want to live, but still doing their job for you? How can we incentivize that? And it's happening in other states. It's not a unique idea to us. We're ripping off and duplicating that idea, too. And so that's the Institute thing. Meanwhile, we're going to try and build capacity through our 501c3 to help you, to help My Tri 2030 and all the local people get the resources they need to better do their job locally, to make that Army effective. And so we're going to try and raise money from very large foundations to get behind these big projects and to get behind your projects down at the local level where the work really happens. So there's a lot going on here. That's what's all in, that's Washington in the making, a whole different way of coming at this. Not a bunch of committees sitting in a room saying this is our economic development thing. It's not that at all, frankly.
That's great. Because I've looked at the website, I've seen the emails, and haven't had a chance to really get into it. But in 10 minutes, you just gave us a really great rundown. And just a couple of highlights I really appreciated about it is, number one, that instead of standing up new committees, you kind of did this quantitative analysis, right? Like you just said, well, let's look at everybody else's plan and look for some clusters, which is a great way to aggregate that data and, look for the high points, which makes a lot of sense. And then just something I wrote down on the intrastate migration, that's something that we talk about all the time. And, even in our recent TRIDEC board meetings and our board composition, when we have some large employers that do nationwide searches for executives and people, and they're feeding us back, like during COVID, they're getting more responses from people in big markets, out of state, Chicago, Midwest, East Coast, that are really interested in taking a job at the Tri-Cities now for the same reason. And so, I think that what I really appreciated is the tie-in to your Renaissance group that identified retirees as somebody that we need to bring in. And right, it's all about bringing in people with income. In today's world, I think remote workers is a great example because, as you already said, Mike, currently about 11% of our workforce is directly related to federal dollars. So that includes our colleagues at P&L. But then they represent an aggregate about 23% of the dollars in the workforce. We bring in somebody that can work remotely that kind of fits into that wage scale. It helps us with our ultimate mission of diversifying the economy, and it's part of what we can do. So I'll just say for TRIDEC's point of view, and obviously we got a great relationship with AWB and the Institute. We're ready to help out at a local level and things that we can do to contribute, because I think this is literally rising tide's going to float all boats.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And well, actually, I'm going to turn it around. We're here to help you. But yeah, and we try and come up with punchy one-liners, like make the workplace an extension of the classroom. But why don't we think about recruiting people instead of businesses? Or not, and let me rephrase that. Why don't we think about recruiting people in addition to recruiting businesses? I'm not saying wouldn't have to be in the business recruitment thing, but why not, rainmakers, and why not, even average, remote working people that, they make a nice income, they'll prop up your schools, they'll shop in your stores. It's a wonderful thing. And think what just a few can mean to a town like Cleellum.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot, so, and I think it's a win-win deal. Among the things that Chris and I have done, we went to the Brookings Institution. They have we have some colleagues there. I do, some friends, and they have a metropolitan studies program. But in talking to Mark Murrow there, he says there's two things I recommend you guys out there in Washington, and he's quite familiar with our state. And he said, one, go back and tell them the cavalry's not coming. There is no cavalry, and so you're on your own. So that's one reason we're doing this. Second thing he said was, you know, you guys are kind of whiny about Seattle being so dominant in your economy. He says, why don't you go back and figure out how to make Seattle part of the whole ecosystem of your state? I mean, be purposeful about, don't fight it, don't whine about it, don't, you know, include them, you know, spread them around. Go figure out how you're going to do that. Well, one way to do that is help their employees live someplace those employees want to live and where it's affordable for them and easier to raise a family or whatever it is they're looking for in their life. You know, give them a choice. And in today's world, and especially with COVID now going on, we see that's more possible than ever. So those are good things, good ideas to steal from some other people.
That's right. Well, and I think it makes so much sense, and we've talked about it on previous meetings, you know, with Michael Novakovich from Visit Tri-Cities, and again, I keep on going back to when I was first here for my first interview. You know, Michael Novakovich and Lori Matson from the Regional Chamber both took about an hour and a half, 2 hours out of their day, and gave me this great driving tour of the Tri-Cities, and we had a great talk. And you know, we started talking back then about what can we do together, you know, what are some things we can work on in the future. And I think what you just talked about, and how do we actually make that happen? And it really relates back to what you just described as the history of, you know, the Renaissance movement back in the 80s with whether it's youth sports or some of these other initiatives. Because what we can do, I think, to your point, beyond all these other things, what we can do locally is how do we make our area more appealing with more amenities and you know, placemaking, which is really important even in, you know, economic development. So International Economic Development Council, IEDC, right, the nationwide organization, when they talk about that, they actually talk about that. I think historically, and kind of going back in time, almost just like when you started with TRIDEC and Sam Volpentest, there were walls up between our community organizations. You know, like tourism wasn't necessarily part of economic development, but in today's world, anything that we can all do working together to make us be a better place for people to visit makes us a better place for people to work. So if somebody comes here with their sports kids, right, for a soccer tournament or, you know, whatever, and they're like, wow, this is great, the sun's shining, beautiful places, wineries, I love this quality of life, how can I get here? We need to leave, you know, help them leave with the message about saying, hey, here's how you can work remotely. Here's how you, if you own your own business, would love to host you and bring you in and do exactly the things that you're talking about, because it literally is, we're all connected in these things that you're describing.
We are. I got it. Yeah, I said Chris Watkins, Michael's predecessor.
Yeah.
This was a number of years ago, an article out of the Wall Street Journal. And the Wall Street Journal had done some kind of an analysis. And they said, you know what? You want to find some of the sort of the best quality of place areas, you know, especially for the new innovation worker and all that sort of stuff. Look where there's the strongest tourism business, because the amenities that you build for tourists are the amenities that the people who live there use and love. And so the sports fields, if we don't have visitors on them, we're on them. The miles and miles, how many miles of trails did they pull off with the river shore enhancement along the river? Who's using them? We are. I mean, you know, it benefits us. It's a system. You know, the whole thing is a system. It's all linked, and you got to make all the little gears spin and be connected. And if you don't think about it that way, you're going to shortchange yourself.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's funny. It just reminds me of another conversation I had last summer back in Washington, D.C. So there's a you know, nationwide trade show, if you will, that is focused on foreign investment, and the U.S. Department of Commerce hosts it, brings it in. I was in Idaho then, so I went to the Idaho booth, but I remember, you know, having a conversation with a peer that I had at the time from Idaho Falls, you know, where, so we all know Idaho National Lab and kind of our energy community, right? Like our partner with Tri-Cities. And she was just asking me, and she had been a former mayor of City Ammon right there. And she said, you know, what's your definition of community development versus economic development? And I just remember the same thing, which again, it's part of our conversation. I just go, you know, you can't really do economic development unless you got a community that people like to live in. Yeah. And so, you know, in my mind, they're linked and intertwined. They're not two separate islands. It's part of the same thing. And, you know, this has been great for me to learn about our history and you know, the role that you've played, Mike, in all of these, examples of how do we bring the community together to overcome resilience or move it ahead, as we're working on now with my Try 2030. And I think that's really the case, is that, and I love your psychology analogy too, that you've really got to think about, how are people thinking, what's on their minds, and how can we get them together to really row in the same direction? It's really great.
One thought I'd leave with you, we all talk about entrepreneurship and innovation, and we've been at that forever too, and we should never give up, and there's some good things going on, but don't always just think about, this is a psychology thing, don't always think about that as, some high-tech thing, the lab spins off some patent and you start up a company. I mean, that's certainly part of it, but innovation is about any new idea. And so to be innovative is to be constantly thinking different, coming up with new ideas. How about this? How about this? In everything that we do, everything. How government operates, how our schools operate. I mean, Delta High School was a new idea, a lot of the STEM stuff, those are all new ideas. Let's go try them, but it's not a high-tech startup company, right? And so don't be innovative in everything, and that's a psychological thing. Think different, do different. those are the buzzwords for the Institute, and if you're not doing those two things, sorry, you're in the wrong place.
No, exactly. Well, we got about 4 minutes, and I was just thinking of a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. You talked about that you had a nuclear engineering background, as you were looking for places to come to. So just out of curiosity, were you in the Navy? I know there's kind of a strong correlation with, the Navy and nuclear, but was that your background, or what was your background before you came?
I was blind and couldn't get into the Navy. I tried. But you know what the Navy guys said? They said, go down the hallway, the Army will take anybody. So I was in the Army, and in the ordnance side and in the nuclear weapons side of the Army, which most people don't even know exists, but it does.
Oh, that's great. And the reason I ask it again, because, we talked about Lewiston and this connection, but I enlisted in the Navy before I graduated from high school in the nuclear power program. And then that summer I worked in a grain elevator, actually in, now I'm based in Malden, the town that burnt down here recently. And it turns out I was allergic to grain dust. I wasn't allergic to dust, but grain dust, and I was on delayed enlistment. So the day that I went to the federal building in Spokane to ship off to Great Lakes Naval Training Academy, they go, oh no, we can't take you. So I ended up going to college instead. And so I tell that story because, I had an interest in nuclear now, and it's just great for me. I really appreciate learning about what our opportunities are in nuclear. And I think it's great that we've almost feels like come full circle, right? With obviously the work that's been done in the past to stand up so many different, nuclear generating opportunities. And now with, small modular reactors and all these other things going on, there's that new kind of a new hope. So I think it's really great.
It is great. And you guys in this community should be thinking big and be all over that. I'm sure you are. But.
Yeah, no, we'll talk again and make sure that, it's always good to think big. We've got some great opportunities, but we're looking forward to it for sure. Well, we got 2 minutes. You want to say something about your old band or your new band? I think that's great. We played your song before, and you mentioned that you've got a new band standing up. So you want to give a plug to them?
When I go to the grave or they incinerate me or whatever, I'm going to have a guitar in my hands. So that's my goal. No, the Highway 12 lasted for 15 years, and then threw in the towel. Everybody was retired, and that was that. And so, but I wanted to keep playing. So I've glommed on to a new group. It's called Floydian Pulse. I can't even say it. Anyway, it's a Pink Floyd tribute band, and I'm a big David Gilmour. He's the lead guitar player for Pink Floyd. I just think he's the greatest guitar player ever. So it's in retirement, I need big challenges to keep me getting up every day, and that's a big one. So it's a large group, 11 musicians and then a sound person. It's a very big operation. Unfortunately, we're all shut down, but we were able to do a couple of shows. We played on the 3-on-3 basketball thing. We played John Dam Plaza last July, and then in Puyallup in October. That's it. But anyway, that's what I'm doing now, and still playing. And every day I pick it up and work on that music.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Mike, We really appreciate your time today. This has been great for me. This is just like if you and I had a chance to go have a cup of coffee. So appreciate your time and really appreciate your dedication to the Tri-Cities. I didn't mention 2008 Tri-City of the Year. That's a amazing award. I think it's a small, representation of the work that you've done here. But thanks for your time this morning. Do you have any closing remarks before we turn off?
No, it's been awesome. I felt like we've been sitting across the table having a cup of coffee. It's really fun. This is a great format. I hope it worked for you. I hope we achieved what you wanted to achieve today.
Definitely.
And we'll look forward to working with you through Washington in the making. So
we look forward to that too. Mike, well, thanks a lot for your time this morning. Thanks for all you've done for the Tri-Cities, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. And thanks to Ashley and Tracy. So.
You bet. Thank you.
It's time to grab a partner and some dancing shoes. We're gonna have some fun all night long. The music gonna make you feel alright because Highway 12's in the house tonight. We got Johnny on the drums and Randy thumping the bass. Jen will blow a hopper, you, but just in case. We got Gus and guitar and Mike and ripping the lead. Be sure to hit the music, oh, know what you need. The music gonna make you feel alright because Highway 12's in the house tonight. Suffering from a bad case of brain drain. You can't deny it, you know it's true. Rock and roll music is a cure for you. I say, Highway 12's in the house tonight. We're feeling the love, we're digging the vibe. We're singing and dancing and cutting the groove. We got the cure for what's ailing you. The music gonna make you feel alright because Highway 12's in the house tonight. Yeah.